Welcome back to our first show of our new season here on Brownsville Matters. I'm your host, Dr. W.F. Strong, and I'm delighted to have one of my best friends in the world here, Dr. Juliet Garcia. And we're going to talk about, well, many, many things, but mostly we're going to talk about a sense of place. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, my friend.
So glad to have you. There's so much that we could talk about, and we would be here for hours, but I wanted to focus on, really the prime subject of Brownsville Matters, which is about the kind of, I would say, continuous renaissance that we're seeing in the community. And you've lived here all your life, so you've seen enormous changes, and you've been responsible for a great number of these changes. So I wanted to kind of focus on TSC and UTB and that what I call a learning park that you helped to create there. I wanted to begin, when did you become president at TSC?
1986.
1986. Mm-hmm. What were your first thoughts upon taking the helm there? No doubt there are many, many things, but what did you take on as some of your first projects that you felt this must be done?
I think the shock of having been selected, because I was selected, and it was effective immediately. So I was given the calendar.
You were how old then?
Pardon?
How old were you?
I was 37.
Okay, so you were the youngest president?
Yes, I was the only woman in the state of Texas to be community college president out of 52, I think. And, of course, the only Latina. But I didn't know that then. All I knew was what was right in front of me, and that was that I had been selected at great risk, probably to the community. But I had faith. I had the faith of people around me and their willingness to help make something happen. And then we had the notion of things were broken, and my job was to help fix it. So my idea was, how do I fix it? How do I create a better place for our students and for our faculty and for the city that I was born in?
So what was broken?
I had chaired the Reaffirmation for Accreditation Committee for 3 years. Prior to that, I had been a dean of arts and sciences. So I knew there were lots of things broken. I knew we could have been growing faster than we were, but we had no resources. We had no money except to tax students or to tax the community. So we were always in search of external money to grow our school. I knew that the community was growing faster than we were as a college, and that meant we were at capacity. We didn't have enough classrooms, libraries, faculty spaces for people to learn. And I knew that there was an embedded need for people who had not had access for decades. So there was a
pent-up demand.
Pent-up demand. Thank you. I couldn't. It was a pent-up demand for our services. So you had the current demand, and then you had the pent-up demand, and then the other part that was really difficult to fathom at the moment was we were about to move into the next century. We were at the end of the current century, and people were thinking, what kind of jobs are there going to be for our students? And we had discovered that there needed to be jobs, the jobs that were going to be available for students were going to be jobs for students who had associate degrees, but more than likely had baccalaureate degrees. So all of those pressing issues were on me, aside from making sure our paychecks got out on time. You had to do the mundane in order to do the bigger picture.
As I recall, now you hired me in 1988 when I was 33 years old there at TSC. I came from Arizona here, and so I've been here ever since, here in the Valley. I went over to Pan Am for a while and back to UTB, so we have a long history together.
Yes, we do.
But I recall you saying that when you took over back in those days in the late 80s, that one of your other concerns was to make the campus itself a more beautiful place, that it had been kind of neglected. And someone had advised you to pay attention to landscaping and stuff like that.
Well, I've always loved beautiful spaces, and I was able to travel when I was young. My father worked for Pan American Airways, and so we were able to travel to lots of places.
Pan Am was here, right? In Brownsville, it was located.
Pan American Airways was here, was not headquartered here, but it was a main maintenance facility. It was where the jets had to land for the last time to refuel before traveling to Central and South America. And so they also had a big maintenance operation here. So as a result, I got to go lots of places that most kids from Brownsville don't get to go at a very, very young age. And I had seen beautiful spaces. And I had wondered, why don't we have them here? And then I had heard my father talk about the Opera House. And I would say, what Opera House? And he said, well, yes, Matamoros had an opera house and Brownsville had an opera house. I said, where is it? Well, it had turned into a boxing ring along the way. So I thought, what happened to us? What was the trajectory at one moment that then veered off and then created a different place? And could we recapture that cosmopolitan, a word my father used to describe his growing up here? Could we recapture a more cosmopolitan area and place to live? So the focus for me was, can we do that on our campus? And no money had been spent on the campus for years, because the only way they could get money was to tax students. So if you wanted to build a library, you added a library fee or library tax, and that's who built the building. And we thought that was quite unfair, because there was another way you could generate dollars, and that was a general obligation bond. And that meant that you would oblige the general public that was in the college district to also help fund projects. So we decided that very first year to try and go out to the public for the very first time in its history, because TSC had started in 1926. This was 1986.
And it is the oldest
it is
community college in the state, right?
They were called junior colleges at the time, but it is the first in the state of Texas to be accredited by Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. So we were on the right path. We got it right in 1926, but somewhere along the way we slowed down, and others kind of sped out in front of us. So we decided to go out for a general obligation bond. So I remember calling the librarian and saying, send me everything there is in the library about general obligation bonds. I had no idea how to fund something like this, and we learned. And then we proceeded to plan one. So I remember going to a meeting in Atlanta that year with presidents, other or community college presidents, and they said, well, we'll see you in December. And I said, no, I won't be back, because we're going to have an election for a general obligation bond in our college district. And they looked at me like I was committing suicide. And they said, well, we won't ever see you again, because you don't do this the first year you're president anywhere. We didn't know what we didn't know. And so I was named in February. We worked on all the plans of how to do this. We knew where we were going. And we then proceeded to go out and meet the community, wherever they would allow us to talk to them, in Rotary clubs, Elks Lodges, Lions, all the animal clubs, as I call them, wherever we could get an invitation to speak, to tell them that we had this potential here of growing a college, but we needed their help. And we needed them to all pay a little bit of the price so that their kids, their husbands and wives, could benefit. So in December, we held the election, and we passed the first general obligation bond for Texas Southmost College that December.
Do you remember how much it was for?
I want to say about $14 million, which was so much money in those days. It was huge. But for us, it was changing the 5 cents per $100 valuation to 10 cents. So it was significant. You were doubling the tax rate for a broad community, which includes all of Brownsville, South Padre Island, Port Isabel, Los Fresnos, and part of San Benito.
Why wasn't Harlingen ever in the district?
Because they didn't want to be taxed. So when they first started the school district, actually, it was in the 1950s when they formed the first taxing district for the community college. They just decided that the people who were designing the district, they said if we include Harlingen, we'll lose the vote to tax. So let's leave Harlingen out, and let's leave all the other communities in. We can get those, and that was how it was decided.
I had a young lady come to visit me yesterday, a student from McAllen, and she's a student at UTRGV in Edinburgh, about 40 years old. She's Asian, and she had never been here on this campus before. And she'd been to a lot of campuses in Texas, and she was overwhelmed. She said, I crossed the bridge, and she said, it is so beautiful, such a beautiful, charming campus. She said, how did this happen? And so you have been here from the time, because I remember when I came here in 1988 and I walked across campus, there were concrete pipes laying around on the campus, and there was caliche in lots of places where there should be grass. And the campus has been totally transformed, both the UTRGV side and the TSC side. But you were here president when it was all together as one. So what did you do to make this kind of oasis within Brownsville possible?
I've always wondered why we couldn't have things here that I was experiencing elsewhere. And I had been a student at also University of Houston, Southwest Texas State for a while, and the University of Texas at Austin. And then I had traveled. I had been to Stanford and to Harvard and to other places. And I see their campuses, and I wonder, well, what makes them more deserving than our students? And I just couldn't ever get that out of my mind. So I was always bringing home ideas of things that I had seen. But I learned about the sense of place. Normally we think of space and acres and square footage, but we don't think about the sense of place it gives us. And yet, when we think about where we want to go back, it was a certain space that gave us a wonderful feeling of specialness because we were there and we were with it. And so we didn't know what we were doing at the time. We were simply growing capacity for students with classrooms and offices for faculty and more library space and all. But while we were doing that, we had an artistic part of our brain saying, and while we're creating more, we should create a sense of beauty. Because I know, for me personally, if I'm in a beautiful place, I think differently. My mind just races, and I don't want to leave the space itself. So space converted to a sense of place, not my idea. It comes from architects and environmentalists who have helped think through that concept. Well, I just adopted it, as I do many good ideas, and said, okay, how do we create not just more space on our campus, but also a sense of place? And what does that mean? And I didn't want it to look like Guanajuato or Monterrey or Austin or Boston. I wanted it to interpret who we were here. And we've always known that we're a very special interface zone, a place where two cultures convene, monetary systems, languages. And so we're different. We're a little bit different than if we were raised in Austin or in Monterrey. Yeah. So can we dig really deep into our roots and understand and then interpret into design and spaces and create a sense of importance? You know, you and I did not grow up in a hacienda. But we dreamt we should have. And we saw ourselves often when you go to a museum or a palace somewhere and you think, I could have been here. Why wasn't I here? So I thought every one of our students ought to be able to grow up in their own beautiful places so that they could have this sense of, I'm worth it. I'm worth the time I'm spending on campus to think and to dream and to create. And I remember we did so well that a faculty member's wife got after me one time, and she said, I'm very upset at you. And I said, well, why? Well, people were always upset at us for some reason, but she said, because my husband hated being here at work, and so he would teach his classes and then come home. But now he just hangs around here. And so she was very upset because I had taken her husband away from him going home. So,
well, I think one of the compliments to the environment is the huge number of of young married or would-be married couples who come to take their wedding pictures or their engagement pictures.
Or quinceañera pictures.
Quinceañera
yes,
pictures.
Yeah.
They come. They used to come to the Rose Garden that was behind your office there, behind Gorgas, and now they go to the bridge, the TSC bridge, or now the UTRGV bridge. These are beautiful places as backdrops to these kinds of celebrations, and they can't get it much. There are other places in Brownsville, but these are the ones people think of.
And they look authentic.
Uh-huh.
That was an important part of this. We didn't want to create a place that didn't look like it belonged here, because sometimes you try to do that and it just doesn't quite work fine.
Well, you kind of wanted to extend the architecture of the old Fort Brown, right?
Precisely. We did that with great intentionality. We asked people, what do you like about Gorgas building? Mm-hmm. And we got the same answers over and over and over. We like the arches. We like the arcades. Mm-hmm. We like the sound of the feet as they're walking on the arcade. It's wooden, and that has a good sense for us. We like the shape of the windows and the transoms above the doors that could open for ventilation in the olden days. We like the shape of the windows. We like the pitch of the roof. So we took about 8 or 9 of those elements, and we said, those are ours. We're going to replicate those throughout our new construction projects. They don't have to be exactly the same, but they have to always tie back in and pay homage to those.
I remember
buildings.
one of the architects that you brought here from San Antonio, I believe, used this phrase. It's always stuck with me. He said, we wanted the buildings to speak the same architectural dialect. And I had never heard that particular metaphor, but it's always stuck with me. So we wanted the buildings to have the same dialect so that you would carry on the influence from one to the next. And actually the arches are so brilliant because if anyone is a photographer, it just plays with light in the most interesting ways. And you just wait an hour and the shadows have changed and you have a new artistic photograph just from the arches and the sunlight coming through them in unique ways. Wonderful.
One of my students told me a story about bringing his mother to campus. And the mother had never been to a university campus, and he's walking her around. It's a weekend, so the campus is not populated. And they come to the Tree of Life at the Life and Health Sciences building, which is a perfect example of the art that was created on our campus. And she walked into the space of mosaico on the floor, and the column that goes up looks like the double helix going up to create the trunk of the Tree of Life. And she looked at the space and she just stood there and she said to him, ¿Quién eran, mijo? And he said, ¿Qué madre? ¿De qué hablas? And she said, ¿Quién eran los que hicieron esto? ¿Y por qué lo hicieron? She just fell in love with the sense of place.
Yeah.
And she wanted to know who had done
Who did
this.
Yeah.
And of course, it wasn't one person. It was so many people. That's a good example of how you think of an idea and then you give it to an expert and they make it happen, right? So I asked the architects in that particular project, that I said, I want there to be some art here. I want it to be low maintenance, so that means outdoor, accessible to everybody. And I wanted to communicate what we're going to teach here. And life and health sciences then are where the students learn how to be nurses or technicians or respiratory therapists. And so they're going to create life. They're going to protect life. And they're going to, so go do something and come back and tell us what you created. And he came back with the idea of the Tree of Life.
Tree of Life.
And it was magnificent. I mean, it was wonderful, and it is still a beautiful.
And there are so many photographs taken there where people, stand on the Tree of Life at the bottom, arm in arm and all that. And then you have the other placita around the corner that has kind of the herbal garden that celebrates the role of herbs and healing.
Exactly, because we knew that many of our students were not aware of the hierbas that are used for healing, and that they needed to understand the connection between what people normally use or many times use and what they were learning in their classroom. So we built that garden.
It's a beautiful tip of the hat to the alternative health. The alternative health of curanderismo and what you might call pure science, and how they complement each other. It's nice. And actually along the Resaca now, they have a huge herbal garden that probably has 60, 70 different varieties of plants over there that I believe students have been primarily responsible.
Yes, one of our professors in biology started them, and now she's got students taking care of them and growing them.
Yeah.
And every time I walk by, there's a new little square that's got some new herb in it.
So your original architecture quite literally planted the seed for what we're seeing growing over there today.
Okay,
It's
so
wonderful.
so the landscaping, now that you mentioned seed, we also had to think about what the landscaping was going to do. And we had criteria. It had to be native. We made a couple of exceptions, like the oak tree, because we needed shade.
Sure.
And oak isn't native, but it passes our test because we really needed to shade the paseo for students to walk through. But everything else was going to be native. So we were very strict about whatever we planted had to be real to the community and survive the hot summers and the not so cold winters.
Well, even the paseo itself is a beautiful touch. And calling it the paseo, I love that.
Many of the words that we used helped, if you notice, helped define the sense of place.
Sure.
So in the student union, the rooms are named for native flowers. So the bougainvillea room, or the different rooms that were named for the flowers that grow here. We call the space where people eat the comedor, because everyone has a comedor, and a sala where everybody convenes. And so we wanted to tip our hat to the bilingual and biliterate nature of our community. And when you see a space called the comedor, it invites you in. It's something familiar to you. And we thought that they needed to be authentic to the people that grow up here.
You also were the first, in your time at TSC, one of the first things you did was to put a retaining wall around the Resaca and to clear out all the bamboo and to make it more accessible in a sense, right?
Well, yes, and it was very
with the jogging trail around
the
it.
jogging trail and if you have a property that's on a Resaca, you consider that very valuable property.
Yes.
Well, we had property adjacent to a Resaca, but we had a street in front of it. And so it was not a friendly place, and you couldn't enjoy the water. And so we said, okay, let's turn it all around and let's face the Resaca. So everything we build now is going to invite the Resaca to be part of the integral nature of the campus. So when we built the Arts Center, for example, we wanted to hide the Arts Center from all the truck traffic that was on International Boulevard because of the sounds of the trucks coming by. That's before Veterans Bridge was built, and so that was still the main thoroughfare for truck traffic to go to Matamoros and back. And the sound was terrible. So we said, we're going to leave Jacob Brown there. That will give us a buttress to block the sound. And then we're going to build the Arts Center facing the Resaca. So you notice it has no front door, back door, side door. In fact, it's a round building. And so the front door is where the reception area is, where the lobby is, facing the Resaca. So I got that idea from going to the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. Because you go to the Kennedy Center and you come out during the performance to have a glass of champagne or wine or whatever, and you are out looking at the Potomac. You're in their reception hall lobby, but you're looking at the Potomac River. And I thought, well, we have a Potomac. We have our Resaca. So can we face the lobby toward the Resaca? So I simply asked the architects, figure out if we can do this. And they designed what ended up becoming a beautiful swirl building that, I'm trying to think of the name of those shell.
You know what it reminds me of? The
Nautilus.
When I'm up at the eastern end looking west toward that, completely up the Resaca from 300 yards away, I think of the Sydney Opera House
Okay.
because it juts out over the water. And or appears to, I think it actually does in Sydney, but it reminds me of that because it kind of frames itself in the water, and of course, certain times of day it gets a beautiful reflection. So, I think you've done a wonderful job, along with others, in designing something that takes advantage of the natural features given to us in the best possible way. The one tradition that I was sad never managed to sustain itself was when early on in 1990s we were trying to plant trees for every faculty who died, and to have a tree so that they would be forever remembered here as a tribute to them. And I know I was here for the planting of Walter Pierce's oak tree, and I still know where it is. I can point to it, and it makes me feel good because he played tennis all the time in those tennis courts, and that tree, was just at the north end of those. And so I know there were a few others planted for faculty, but then we kind of, I guess it got difficult to sustain, and then there are no plaques put on them, so we don't know. Well, I just happen to know the one, but
I went to Egypt years ago, and I remember walking down a temple, the centerpiece of a temple, and you see these huge buildings and these columns, and they would have, say, the picture of the pharaoh on a column, but they would be scratched off. And I asked the tour guide, why are they scratched off? And they would explain that pharaoh was no longer in good standing, and so they had scratched the face off. Today we call it to deface. Someone. And I remember standing there thinking, if a pharaoh can be defaced, so can you. And that happens in places. It does. People forget. They remove plaques, which I think is a crummy thing to do. But they remove the history that it was important to someone. Like the trees and the plaques that went with those trees. That's important to everyone who knew Wally and to everyone else that we planted a tree for. Or the plaques of the people that helped build a building. Those are, you don't change history, you record it, and then you make your own history when it's your turn. But you don't go back and try to deface what happened before. So the Art Center is a good example. The Art Center was part of the bond issue, another bond issue that we had passed. And it's what everybody had wanted for so many years. They wanted a place that was respectful of the students who love music. And I don't know of any other community in the state of Texas that has children in junior high and high school that with no comparison win more contests at the state level than ours do. I mean, I know the numbers because I had to argue it at this coordinating board to get us a music degree. But our kids excel. And yet, when they finished high school, they didn't have a place to play. I mean, they had better facilities at their high school than we had at the university. So we said, no, we're going to build an arts center that's respectful of the love that people have already for music. So people have a place to then go and study music even more. So the Art Center was a very special project, and it created a space that also has performance hall, but it has beautiful performance hall, but it also has practice areas for the mariachi band and for the orchestra and for the strings and so for the guitar.
It's our Carnegie Hall.
It is our own
Carnegie
little
Hall.
Carnegie Hall, and some of our students have played at Carnegie Hall, but they started out at our Arts Center first. And we bought our first Steinway piano. That was a big deal. Suzanne Erbish stood in line,
forgot about the Steinway.
To get our first Steinway. And she said, I'm standing behind the person from Yale, and they're buying 9. And I said, well, stay in line and just buy the one you can buy and bring it home. But our students get to touch and then play on a Steinway here at their home, and they should be able to do that.
You're a member of the faculty now. You've been retired as president, or you have retreated to faculty, we used to say. I don't know if we use that term anymore. But you've come back to faculty.
Yes.
And you've been with us for 6 years now in the Department of Communication. But this love of building has never left you. And you have one really at least you have one major project you would like to see completed before you ride off into the sunset, right?
Yes.
And this is a beautiful project. I want to be one of the first to donate to the cause. But tell us about it. This is you call it the mural project, library mural? What is the
Library
name
mural,
of it?
yes. We learned early on that California had a law that said they could spend 1% of their total construction costs on art for public buildings. We thought that's a great law. So we borrowed it from California, showed it to our trustees, and they adopted it. So in every one of our buildings, we spent some money on making things beautiful. So the Tree of Life is a good example for the Life and Health Sciences building. The Arts Center has another one. Even the Child Care Center had a beautiful little chandelier made of blown glass by a lady named Garcia from San Antonio, and she put the parrot of that's indigenous to the community and the flowers, and so every space that we built had some money, a portion for art. We got to the library, and it was time to put a mural up that we had decided that the architects had helped us design for the front of the building. And it became a bit of a contentious item. And there were hard times in our community. And even though we had the money set aside because of the bond issue that we had passed and raised money, the board decided that they did not want to proceed with the project. The mural would have been like the UNAM picture that everybody sees, University of in Mexico. You see a building that's got a mosaic that tells a story on it. And the most pictured, photographed building on the UNAM campus is the library. So if you go to Stanford, they have a beautiful chapel that was designed also with this art of a mosaic on the front of it. And it was designed by the parents of the young man Stanford that died, and in his honor. So we wanted to honor the love of learning, and so we commissioned to have a mural designed, and then we were going to put it on the front, as if you look at the library now, and you will now that you've heard the story, you'll go by and you'll think, oh, it's a canvas that needs a painting on it. Well, this was going to be a mosaic. So again, it met our criteria. It was our story. It was a story of learning in this regard. Campus libraries are thought of as the cathedrals of the campus, the place where it all comes from and where you learn before internet.
And truly some of the most gorgeous buildings in all the world are libraries. You know, you can look at collections of great artistic photographs, and they're often of libraries, external or internal. They're just
you send out beautiful
places.
Pictures often of libraries.
I do. I love them.
They're beautiful.
I love them.
I have visited the Alexandrina Library in Egypt, which is supposed to be the greatest library in the world.
Yeah.
But why shouldn't we have one here?
Right.
Why should? And you walk into our library any day of the year, it is filled with kids not looking at the books. Now it's looking at their computers, but it's a place to study and be quiet and think.
Cicero, speaking of the ancient world, Cicero said that if you have a library and a garden, you have all that you need.
So Cicero's right.
Yeah.
I will concur because we thought about spaces also between buildings. You know, there's a big difference between a space and a place, right? So we have spaces on campus, but can they create together a sense of place? And so you notice that we thought of that in between buildings. So there are walkways, there's gardens, there's fountains, there's courtyards, places where you can sit and think between classes. And that's where often you come up with your best ideas. It's over a cup of coffee, talking to a friend and imagining.
Well, in the main building there are two, I think you call them placitas, and or at least that was the quote official name for them. And the students are always sitting out there because they're such comfortable places. They do have a sense of place, a place to study and converse. And one of the things I love is that little bench that you place there of the two children reading together in that western placita of the main building. But
that idea came from Jose Martin, by the way. Jose Martin and I were in California for a meeting, and we saw it somewhere, some little store. He said, you and I need to buy it, and we need to gift it. And I said, okay, which we did.
And I appreciate it every day that I go by there. There's, but it's absolutely true. Yesterday you showed me the mural that was designed for the library, and now I can't unsee it. I walked by it just yesterday after you showed it to me, and I said, well, of course, there it is. And I'll never be able to walk by and not see it.
You know Oliver Wendell Holmes' statement of a mind once stretched never regains its original dimensions. And that's
true.
what happened to
That's
you.
true. Yes,
and
that's what
it happens
happened.
to all of us.
Yeah.
So once you see other things, I was on the UT campus for many years working on the doctorate. There are 26 libraries on the University of Texas, Austin campus. That's when I was a student there. And I kept thinking, why do they deserve 25 more than we have? What makes them so much more deserving? Well, they doesn't. It's resources. It's just being able to imagine more for us here, for our students here.
Well, they were tapped into the PUF funds
Well,
long
yes,
before
that's
we
a whole
were.
other version, a whole other story.
And they have a great deal more money from alumni giving to those causes. And but there's no reason we can't get there.
Well,
It's happening.
You bring up an important point. None of this work was done because one person imagined it. None of us have the resources personally to be able to do that. But together, we could dream it and then we could do it. And everybody brought something to the design or the idea of the wind. Jose Martino, brilliant provost that we had also wanted to be an architect, and he was an engineer. So he would mix that all up, and a philosopher. and he would make us look at the wind, the prevailing wind, so that we would position a building so that it would invite the prevailing wind into our campus to cool those courtyards down. Because if you build a courtyard and it has no airflow, you're killing everyone that's sitting in that lovely courtyard. So every time Jose was looking at a plan, he would say, "And the wind," and the architect would say, "Yes, sir. We thought about that." So everybody that was part of it added a piece that together then created all that we created. So when someone says, "¿Quién eran?" Esos quisieron esto. Who were the people that did this? Well, it was many of us who added an arch or deleted an arch or thought about a courtyard. And to go back to courtyards for a minute, courtyards are important because they create a space for us to talk to each other. If you're in a building that simply has little cubby holes and you can go in and close your door and not interact, then that's what you get. But if you create spaces, you say, well, let's just go out to the courtyard and talk. Why would you stay in an office in a little square space when you could sit with flowers and vines and a little breeze now and then and enjoy time together? So courtyards are made to also create an interactive environment. And, Silicon Valley figured that out, right? They went from cubby holes to the new designs where everybody is in one design building. They think it's very, very avant-garde. A courtyard then is avant-garde.
And I like that in the midst of all of this building of the new, you preserve the old. In a lot of places, they take out the old and just build new, and we have buildings that date back to, 1850 or so? Some of them?
Yes, and people like that we respected our heritage and our history. And we borrowed, of course, from the fort buildings, the hospital, but we also borrowed from the city. So we wanted to expand it out a little bit. So I said, if it's in Brownsville and it's historic, you can bring that feature onto campus. So Market Square, for example, has a cupola on top of it, right?
Yeah.
So we said, oh, okay,
We'll do
that's
that.
authentic. We can have one on our campus. But it had to draw from the city's historic nature and language, and then it could become part of what we were.
And you've created such a lovely place that even the ghosts have stayed.
The ghost, people would get real angry at me because they'd say, "You're here all the time. Have you ever had an encounter?" And I'd say, no. And they'd say, "Well, you're just not very sensitive." I guess. So
There's the proof
for
right
the
there.
record,
if you were sensitive, you would have seen a
Not
ghost. Yeah,
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right. I am a ghost, baby.
Well, the murals project, how do you want to proceed with that? It needs to be done, now, mainly for me, because now I can't go by there without feeling
I know, it's a terrible
just not
thing.
finished.
Yeah.
So how would you proceed with finding the funding for this project? Of course, you're going to have to get UT approval now that it's a UT building and everything, but we assume that will be absolutely easy enough to do, given it's fit for us and who we are. But would you just run a kind of fundraising capital campaign of some sort to make this happen?
I think we have to go ahead and design it and then propose it to the to UT RGV, and then have them approve the idea and the design, and then cost it out, and then try to figure out how we're going to raise the money. But I think there would be such interest in being part of it, a little piece of it. As you said earlier, the tree without the label is still a tree. But so can we make that same sense of purpose around this? I think we can. I think it's going to take a concerted effort of lots of people who want to finish that job.
Yeah.
We started something pretty special. And people love it when people come to campus and they'll say, I always bring my guests here. My out-of-town guests is the one place I bring them in Brownsville. So let's finish it up. Let's finish that canvas on the front of the library and put the mural up. The idea of the mural was that it would tell the story of reading and language. And so
That's perfect.
Right? So that's what we're about. So we need to be about that project.
I'll give the first $1,000.
Okay,
right?
there you go.
I got my check written.
I have a
and I'm
contribution
ready.
today.
It's a beginning.
Thank
we
you,
just
sir.
need 999,000 more. We'll be all right.
We'll make it happen.
We can.
We'll make it
I believe
happen.
we can.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in. I love talking to you as always.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I love the fact that you give so much of yourself to our community.
My pleasure.
Thank you.